The ocean covers 71% of the planet, and dolphins live in almost all of it. Coastal waters, open ocean, rivers in some parts of the world. Of all the animals in the sea, they are the ones humans have spent the most time observing, filming, and studying up close. And yet, of everything we've recorded about them, most of it comes from a version of the dolphin built for an audience. Marine parks, trained shows, a handful of famous encounters repeated in documentaries for 60 years. But sometimes the research gives something back that doesn't fit that version. A dead calf washes ashore with injuries that don't match a shark, don't match a boat propeller. Researchers open it up and find blunt force trauma, broken ribs, internal bleeding. Nothing about it looks accidental. This is the common bottlenose dolphin. Adults typically grow between 2.5 and 3.9 meters and weigh anywhere from 135 to 300 kilograms, with the largest confirmed individuals in cold northern waters reaching well beyond that. For most of recorded history, it held one of the most consistent reputations of any wild animal on the planet. In ancient Greece, dolphins were considered sacred, tied to Apollo and Poseidon. Killing one was treated as an offense against the gods themselves. One surviving myth tells of pirates who tried to kidnap Dionysus and were turned into dolphins as punishment, which is part of why the animal was seen as something closer to a transformed person than an ordinary fish. Coins were minted showing dolphins carrying gods and poets safely across open water. That reputation didn't stay in antiquity. It carried forward, mostly unchanged, into the 20th century. He's just such a friendly, gentle animal. For decades, that was the only dolphin most people ever encountered. Flipper, the rescuer, the animal that nudges drowning swimmers back to shore. That image isn't entirely invented. There are real, documented cases behind it, but it was allowed to stand in for the entire species, unchallenged, while a separate body of research was quietly recording something else. In the 1990s, marine biologists studying bottlenose dolphins off the coast of Virginia and Scotland began finding dead newborn calves with the same pattern of injuries: multiple rib fractures, internal hemorrhaging, wounds consistent with repeated forceful ramming. The calves weren't being eaten. They weren't victims of another species. Genetic and behavioral evidence pointed to adult male bottlenose dolphins, the same species as the mother. The explanation researchers eventually settled on is called infanticide, and the logic behind it is cold. A nursing female won't return to fertility until her calf is weaned, which can take years. If a male kills a calf that isn't his own, the mother re-enters her reproductive cycle sooner, and he gets a new chance to mate with her. It's been documented across multiple dolphin populations since, not as a one-time aberration, but as a repeating pattern with a clear reproductive incentive behind it. If that were the only unusual finding, it might read as a single dark chapter in an otherwise gentle story. It isn't the only one. Along the coasts of Scotland, Wales, and later California, researchers started recovering the bodies of harbor porpoises with almost identical injuries to the calves. Broken ribs, blunt trauma, internal damage consistent with being rammed and tossed. Bottlenose dolphins don't eat porpoises. There's no food value in the attack. And yet the killings kept turning up, in different oceans, over different decades, with the same signature of violence. The behavior was first formally documented in 1996, when researchers Harry Ross and Ben Wilson published a study in the Proceedings of the Royal Society examining stranded harbor porpoises around Scotland's Moray Firth. 63% of the porpoises they examined had died from trauma involving multiple skeletal fractures and damaged internal organs, and the spacing of the tooth marks on their skin matched the spacing of a bottlenose dolphin's jaw almost exactly. It has since been confirmed in Wales in California, and as recently as 2020 and 2022 in the Baltic Sea, where a single solitary male dolphin, tracked for 3.5 years and matched by researchers to the same photo identification catalog used in Scotland, killed at least 2 porpoises on his own. Scientists still don't agree on why. One theory is that it's misdirected infanticidal aggression, since porpoises are roughly calf-sized, and the behavior may simply be triggered by the same instinct. Another is that it functions as practice, young males rehearsing the mechanics of dominance on a smaller, less risky target. A third is that it's a form of interspecies competition over shared fish stocks. None of these has been confirmed. What's confirmed is that it happens repeatedly, and that it isn't hunting. The social structure behind this behavior is, on its own, remarkably sophisticated. Male bottlenose dolphins in Shark Bay, Australia, have been documented forming tight alliances, usually 2 or 3 males, in order to isolate a single female and prevent her from leaving the group. Researchers have watched these alliances chase, block, and physically intimidate females for days at a time. It's coordinated, it's strategic, and it means the same cognitive complexity that makes dolphins remarkable is also the machinery behind some of their most aggressive behavior. That same population, in that same stretch of Australian coastline, is also responsible for one of the strangest documented cases of animal culture outside of primates. A subset of Shark Bay's dolphins, almost exclusively females, break sponges off the seafloor and wear them over their beaks like a glove, while foraging along rocky channels, protecting themselves from stings and scrapes while they hunt fish hidden in the rubble. Genetic testing traced the behavior back to a single individual researchers nicknamed Sponging Eve, and confirmed it isn't instinct. It's taught, mother to daughter, passed down for generations. Dolphins that sponge seek each other out socially, forming their own distinct social circle inside the larger pod. Separate from dolphins that hunt without tools. It's one of the only confirmed cases of material culture in a marine mammal, and it exists in the same population, sometimes the same individuals, documented for the coordinated harassment of females and the killing of unrelated young. None of this is happening inside a simple animal. A bottlenose dolphin's brain weighs close to 1.7 kilograms, roughly 25% heavier in absolute terms than the average human brain, though the dolphin's body is considerably larger overall. What matters more than raw weight is the ratio between brain size and body size, a measure called the encephalization quotient. On that scale, bottlenose dolphins score among the highest of any species tested, second only to humans and well above chimpanzees. Their neocortex, the outer layer responsible for complex thought, is heavily folded and contains specialized cells called spindle neurons, a cell type otherwise found almost exclusively in humans and great apes, and linked to social awareness and rapid intuitive judgment. Nobody fully agrees on what that means for how a dolphin actually experiences the world, but it means the same animal committing calculated, repeated violence against calves, porpoises, and occasionally people is doing so with some of the neurological hardware associated with our own capacity for social reasoning. Which raises the obvious question. If a dolphin can plan, coordinate, and execute violence against members of its own species and against other animals with no intention of eating them, and if that same species can independently invent and transmit a technology across generations, what happens when that same animal encounters a much slower, much weaker species that has spent 60 years walking into the water beside it without a second thought? I did not expect this, I have to be honest. In March of 1994, a wild bottlenose dolphin began approaching swimmers near the pier at São Sebastião on the coast of Brazil. Locals named him Tião. At first, the interactions looked exactly like the version of dolphins everyone already believed in. He followed boats. He let people swim beside him. Word spread, and soon as many as 30 people at a time were in the water with him on a single afternoon. The harassment escalated from there. Swimmers grabbed his fins to get pulled through the water. People tried to restrain him to take photographs. Someone attempted to force an ice cream cone into his blowhole. Others tried pouring alcohol into his mouth. By November of that year, 28 people had already been hospitalized after being struck or rammed by the same animal that had, months earlier, seemed harmless. On December 8, 1994, Tião struck a 30-year-old man in the water. The man was taken to a nearby hospital, initially treated for what doctors assumed was ordinary intoxication, and sent home. He died hours later. The cause was internal bleeding from a ruptured stomach. the result of blunt force trauma. It remains the only confirmed human death caused by a wild dolphin on record. What makes the case unsettling isn't that a wild animal eventually reacted to sustained physical harassment. Most species would. What's unsettling is how long the friendly narrative held. How many people continued entering the water with him even after 28 hospitalizations, because the version of the dolphin they'd grown up with didn't leave room for an alternative. That pattern hasn't stopped repeating. Since 2022, more than 45 people have been injured in a string of attacks in Japan's Fukui Prefecture, most of them near the town of Mihama. Officials believe a single male bottlenose dolphin, tracked by the unique markings on its dorsal fin, is responsible for the majority of incidents. Researchers studying the animal describe it as likely solitary, separated from its usual social pod, and possibly displaying frustrated mating behavior toward the swimmers approaching it. In a single week in one recent summer, 4 separate people were injured on the same beach. One man suffered broken ribs. There is no difference between dolphins and bears in terms of destructive capacity. That's a marine park director in Japan, describing the animal responsible for the Fukui attacks, after officials had already posted warning signs along the beach. Swimming hours were reduced, lifeguard patrols were increased, and still, every summer, people waded back into the water toward the same dolphin that had already bitten dozens of others, because the instinct to treat it as flipper is harder to override than the evidence in front of them. None of this happens by accident, and none of it happens without a nervous system built for something most animals don't have. A bottlenose dolphin doesn't just use sound to find food in dark water. When it directs its echolocation clicks at a living target, some of that sound doesn't bounce off the surface. It penetrates. It travels through skin, muscle, and blubber, and reflects off bone, off lungs, off the density differences between healthy tissue and damaged tissue. In effect, a dolphin can generate something functionally close to an ultrasound image of another animal's internal structure in real time from several meters away. Researchers studying the mechanism believe this may allow dolphins to detect pregnancy, assess injury, or read subtle physiological states in other dolphins simply by aiming a beam of sound at them. Some studies have even found that a dolphin emits 2 separate, overlapping sound beams from the same organ at slightly different frequencies, a detail so strange that the researchers who discovered it admitted they still don't fully understand why the animal does it. Which means the same animal capable of organizing a coordinated attack on a calf or ramming a porpoise to death without eating it may also be capable of sensing exactly how injured its target already is while the attack is happening. And it isn't acting on pure instinct when it does any of this. In 1965, researchers Melba and David Caldwell discovered that each bottlenose dolphin develops its own unique whistle within the first few months of life, one that stays consistent for the rest of its life. In 2006, a study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences confirmed that other dolphins recognize this whistle even when every other vocal characteristic is stripped away, meaning the whistle itself carries identity, independent of who's making the sound. Researchers now describe these as signature whistles, functioning almost exactly like a human name. The Sarasota Dolphin Research Program has tracked individual whistles across more than 40 years in some cases, following the same named individual from calfhood into old age. In 2001, researchers Diana Rice and Lori Marino ran a version of the classic mirror test on 2 bottlenose dolphins, marking their bodies with ink in places only visible in a reflection. Both dolphins oriented themselves toward the mirror to inspect the marks, a response taken as evidence of self-recognition. At the time, mirror self-recognition had only been confirmed in humans and a small number of great apes. Later replications, including a 2022 study using a modified marking technique designed around the fact that dolphins have no hands to point with, produced further evidence supporting the same conclusion. Very few animals on Earth have passed this test. Dolphins are one of them. Signature whistles aren't the only layer to dolphin communication that looks less like instinct and more like learned culture. Researchers using hydrophones around the Channel Islands and elsewhere have found that bottlenose dolphins in different regions produce clicks with measurably different frequencies, durations, and gaps between them, even within the same species. A dolphin off the coast of Wales does not click quite like a dolphin off the coast of Jersey or the Azores. Marine biologists have started calling these differences regional accents. Calves appear to acquire the local pattern from their mothers and podmates rather than being born with it, the same way a human child picks up the accent of the household they grow up in. Nobody has demonstrated that dolphins have anything resembling grammar or syntax in the way human language does, so calling it a language remains controversial, but it is, at minimum, a socially transmitted communication system with regional variation, layered on top of individual names, layered on top of a brain built for exactly that kind of complexity. And then there's the behavior that seems to contradict almost everything already described. In multiple documented cases, from the Mediterranean to Florida to New Zealand, mother dolphins have been observed carrying their dead calves on their backs, or pushing the body through the water for days at a time, refusing to let the carcass sink, sometimes vocalizing their own signature whistle over and over, apparently calling for help from other members of the pod. Researchers in Italy recorded one of these events directly, along with the mother's acoustic signals, and described it as epimelectic behavior, the scientific term for caregiving directed at the sick, injured, or dead. It closely resembles what researchers studying orcas have called grief. So the same species documented killing unrelated calves for reproductive advantage is also documented refusing to abandon its own dead calf for days, calling out by name for help that may never come. Scientists still can't fully explain why porpicide happens, why some individuals become isolated from their pods and turn toward humans instead, or how much of what looks like calculated behavior is actually deliberate versus some interaction of hormones, isolation, and stress that we don't yet have the framework to describe. The research keeps circling the same question from different angles without fully landing on an answer. Even the sponging culture in Shark Bay raises its own unresolved question, since despite decades of exposure, dolphins outside that one maternal line have never adopted the technique, and nobody has fully explained why a demonstrably useful tool never spread beyond a single family tree. What the record does make clear is that the dolphin most people picture, the one from the movies and the marine park shows, was never the complete animal. It was the version that was easiest to market, easiest to swim next to, easiest to explain to a child. The actual animal underneath that image has a name for itself, recognizes its own reflection, can read the internal state of another body using sound alone, invents and teaches tools to its offspring, mourns its dead by calling their names into open water, and has used that same intelligence for things far more complicated and far darker than rescuing sailors. And in the same species capable of infanticide, porpicide, and the Tião and Mihama incidents, there is also this. In the coastal town of Laguna in southern Brazil, wild bottlenose dolphins have worked alongside human fishers for more than 150 years, herding schools of mullet through murky water toward a line of people wading waist-deep with nets. The dolphins can see the fish through the silt, the fishers can't. So the dolphins drive the school toward shore, then signal with a deep dive or a head slap at the precise moment the net should be cast, a cue the fishers have learned to read and depend on across generations. Researchers spent more than a decade confirming that the dolphins benefit too, catching disoriented fish scattered by the nets, and found that cooperative individuals actually live longer than dolphins that don't participate. Only around 20 to 40 dolphins in the local population take part. The rest hunt on their own, and nobody has fully explained what separates the two groups, why some individuals choose partnership with an entirely different species, while their relatives never do. So the same animal, sometimes the same population, is capable of forming a working alliance with humans that has lasted a century and a half, and of the kind of calculated violence described earlier in this video. Both are real, both are documented, neither cancels the other out. And if an animal this familiar, this thoroughly filmed, this deeply woven into folklore across a dozen different cultures, can still be this misunderstood after 60 years of close contact, it raises a harder question about everything else we think we've already figured out. Not just in the ocean, anywhere we've decided, on the strength of a few good stories, that we already know what an animal is. There are more than 40 species of dolphin alive today, spread across nearly every ocean and several major river systems, and the bottlenose dolphin most people picture is really only one of them, studied more than the rest simply because it tolerates captivity and shallow coastal water better than its relatives do. The common bottlenose dolphin and the Indo-Pacific bottlenose dolphin weren't even recognized as separate species until genetic testing forced the distinction in the late 1990s, decades after both had already been swimming in front of cameras. Species most people have never heard of, river dolphins in the Ganges, the Amazon, the Indus, remain some of the least studied large mammals on the planet, several of them now critically endangered before science has finished describing the basics of how they live. The gap isn't really about dolphins. It's about how a species enters the public imagination fully formed, through a television show and a theme park act, long before the research has caught up, and how comfortable that first impression becomes once millions of people have already built their understanding of an animal around it. 60 years of documentaries, marine park shows, and swim with dolphins tourism produced a version of this animal that was true just often enough to be believable and simple enough to never require updating. The actual dolphin, the one with a name, a regional accent, an ultrasound built into its skull, and a fully documented capacity for both grief and premeditated violence, was there the entire time. It just never made it into the movie.